Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a truly fascinating intersection. We're talking art, neuroscience, and high-level leadership brought to us by Dr. Delong and Kinexa. Now, you might be wondering, what on earth could one of the greatest painters of the 20th century possibly have to do with modern executive performance? Well, the answer actually lies in the total mastery of movement and the absolute elimination of doubt. Let's see how Henri Matisse offers a surprising, heavily science-backed blueprint for cutting through the noise and acting with absolute clarity. Listen to this for a second. The simplest gesture that says the most. Forms stripped down until nothing more can be removed. For Matisse, this wasn't just a cool artistic style. It was a lifelong, relentless quest for the essential. He spent his entire life looking for this exact state of being. He realized that true creativity, and honestly true action of any kind, requires the profound courage to let go of our comfortable certainties. In our modern hyper-connected world, that philosophy is more relevant than ever. It sets this deeply intellectual yet totally practical foundation for what we're about to explore regarding human performance. So, when Matisse was bedridden by illness late in his life, he didn't just give up. Instead, he invented an entirely new art form, the paper cutouts, or le découpage. Using nothing but scissors and vividly painted paper, he would, as he described it, sculpt into the color. Notice the radical freedom here. Every single cut was a pure, direct, and completely irreversible gesture. No hesitation, no sketching first, and absolutely no correcting. His hand and his vision were perfectly united in one single movement. It's honestly the ultimate visual metaphor for making an unhesitating, fully committed decision. Now, I want you to think about your own professional life for a second. Think about the absolute hardest business decision you've had to make recently. Were your hand and vision perfectly united, or were you fighting your own internal mental noise? What Matisse teaches us here is profoundly applicable to cognitive overload. When the mind is cluttered with endless variables, second-guessing, and stress, the gesture, the decision itself, literally freezes. You absolutely cannot have freedom of action until you first have freedom of the mind. Let's break down what this freezing actually looks like in the corporate world. When an executive's mind is cluttered, they fall into these severe traps of cognitive overload. First, decisions become totally fragmented. You literally have so much information that it paralyzes your judgment. Second, there's a massive amount of wasted energy. Mental overload eats up your cognitive resources before you even take action, meaning you're exhausted before you've actually done a single thing. And finally, there's a complete loss of fluidity. The overloaded manager loses all access to their intuitive intelligence and their natural creativity. Okay, let's dive into this, because what we just described isn't just some fleeting feeling, it's a scientifically validated condition. And hey, if you felt it, you are certainly not alone. Neuroscience defines this exact state as motor and cognitive dysynchronization. It is that critical state where your physical or decisional action is no longer guided by your pure intention, but is instead actively hindered by mental noise. This is exactly what Kinexa Formation and Dr. Delong aim to cure, helping leaders find their way back to a synchronized, fluid state of mind. To really understand what that synchronized, frictionless state looks like, let's look at another one of Matisse's masterpieces, La Danse from 1910. Just take a second to absorb those 5 bright red bodies against that incredibly simple green and blue background. Notice what's missing? There are almost 0 anatomical details. Matisse deliberately stripped them away. He reduced the human body to its absolute cinematic essence, just a curve, a tension, a direction. The body is completely freed from gravity and excess. For a leader, this deliberate removal of the unnecessary perfectly mirrors the removal of mental friction. And this brings us to a really critical contrast in how we usually view success. In the corporate world, we are so often exhausted by this endless pursuit of anatomical perfection. Trying to analyze every single detail, adding more steps, covering every possible microvariable until we're just buried in spreadsheets. But Kinexa's philosophy, totally mirroring Matisse, strives for functional freedom. True performance doesn't come from forcing perfection or adding more effort. It comes from stripping away the barriers. Functional freedom means acting without internal resistance, without having to overcompensate, and without all that unnecessary mental friction. All right, Section 1, the neuroscience of freedom and synchronizing the 3 systems. Now, what's really interesting about this is how Dr. DeLong maps out our decision-making hardware into 3 distinct neurological systems that absolutely must fire in perfect harmony. First up, the primary motor cortex. That handles your intention and kicks off the voluntary movement. Second is the cerebellum, which manages the precise timing, coordination, and immediately corrects any errors. And third, the basal ganglia. This controls automaticity and the smooth fluidity of your habits.
When these three systems are perfectly synced up, your action is incredibly economical, precise, and fluid.
But here is the catch. When these three brain systems fall out of sync, and this is usually caused by chronic stress, cognitive overload, or just deeply ingrained bad habits, everything changes. The action doesn't just get a little bit harder, it becomes entirely fragmented and neurologically costly. Suddenly, every single business action, every meeting, every strategic choice becomes utterly exhausting because your brain systems are essentially fighting each other instead of working as a team. Let's draw this parallels straight back to Matisse. Remember those irreversible scissor cuts? They were powerful precisely because they carried the mark of a fully engaged, completely synchronized gesture. An executive who gets this neurological alignment back through Kinexa's training doesn't suddenly start pulling 80-hour weeks. They don't work harder, they simply work right. A fully engaged gesture doesn't require extra work, just the perfect alignment of intention and execution.
Let's move to section 2 and see how this all builds. The ultimate cost, the manager's motor decision.
So, what's the actual measurable cost of all this neurological desynchronization? Well, let's look at a manager operating in total functional freedom. They are at 100%. This number represents total engagement. It's the absolute maximum capacity mobilized by an executive who commits completely to their motor decision without a single shred of internal resistance or cognitive noise holding them back.
But look at how quickly that drops. 70%. This is the reduced capacity you get when doubt and hesitation invade the nervous system. When that cognitive desynchronization we just talked about happens, your effective output absolutely plummets.
We actually call this the lost tenths in the mind. And I want to be very clear about what this means. A manager operating at 70% capacity isn't doing that because they suddenly forgot how to do their job. It is not a lack of competence at all. It is purely the result of mental noise destroying the quality of their motor decision. That devastating 30% drop, that is the literal gap between a leader's true potential and their actual daily performance. To close that devastating gap, Kinexa formation relies on 3 core pillars inspired by this whole journey. First, radical simplicity. Just like Matisse's cutouts, it's about suppressing the superfluous to reveal the essential movement of the manager. Second, cognitive fluidity. Measuring and actively restoring the synchronization between intention, coordination, and automaticity for every single decision. And third, unmatched quality of gesture. Chasing that functional freedom, where the executive acts without mental resistance or the exhausting need to overcompensate. So the absolute crucial point is this. Kinexa isn't looking at what you're doing in excess. They are searching for the essential gesture that you've lost track of. I want to leave you with a provocative question to reflect on. If true performance isn't about adding more effort, but rather removing the friction, what internal noise is holding back your essential performance? What are you preventing yourself from expressing in your leadership? Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer. Keep stripping away that noise and find your essential gesture.